Ruth, please tell us what is going on today and what you're hoping to let people know about Holiday Brook Farm.
Well, as you can see, we make maple products, maple syrup, maple cream, candies. But at the farm, we also sell grass-fed beef and lamb, and we raise pastured pork. We sell organic vegetables. We have a large compost operation. We sell firewood and hay, and we practice sustainable farming. We have a solar array at the farm that produces our electricity. And
you said compostable.
Compost.
Is that available to the public?
It is. It's finished compost that we sell.
And are people able to bring their compostable products to your farm?
They can bring food waste, yard waste, grass clippings, leaves, things like that, and we incorporate that into making the compost.
And is that for certain hours that people could bring their own waste?
When they bring it, doesn't really matter so much. It's pretty obvious where at the site where they can dump it. There's signs posted so they know.
And you make it clear what's accepted. So it would be vegetable
right, no
products,
plastic bags.
Not meat products.
It actually meat composts.
Meat compost does. Okay.
But mostly that we don't.
Well, no, that's good because some people compost, but they don't do that in their backyard.
Right. So draws.
They might be happy to bring it to you.
Yes.
To your farm.
Yeah.
Okay. What are you hoping people will learn today when they come by your booth?
Well, they can learn about the fact that we're here. We're in Dalton. Set back off of Route 9 a little bit, so people driving by see the sign, but they don't necessarily see all the things that we're doing up there, and so raising awareness about all the things going on at the farm.
Great. And the meat products, do people have to order that in advance?
No, we have many freezers full all the time.
Okay. And your store is available to sell the meat product?
Yes, we have a store. We're in winter hours right now, which is Thursday through Saturday 9 to 5, and then when summer ever comes, it'll be Tuesday through Saturday.
And one of the things that we're involved with is recycling. Towns vary in terms of what their policies are, but many of the towns in this area have their recycled materials taken to Springfield, to the municipal recycling facility there. And there's some real simple rules that can be helpful for people when they're recycling. No plastic bags. Don't put your recyclables in a plastic bag. They don't take plastic bags. On all your plastics, look for a recycling symbol, a little triangle with a number in it. And if it doesn't have a number, don't recycle it.
That would just go straight in the trash.
It would go straight in the trash, unfortunately. If you have a bottle with a screw on top, don't take the top off. You can recycle the bottle with the top on. The other thing that I just learned recently, we take a lot of supplements. And the supplement bottles and like medicine bottles are probably just too small for a facility that sorts recycled materials. They have screens, and these bottles are too small. Even if they have a triangle, they're too small to fit through, so they fall through the screen and create problems at the recycling facility. So unfortunately, you can't recycle those.
They never get recycled. Now,
Right.
The caps on the milk carton, I understood that made it harder to collapse it, but tell me why you want the cap on, please.
Well, there are two things you can do. You can throw the cap out, but then that's plastic. If you include the cap off in your recycled materials, then it falls through the screen and it creates a problem at the recycling facility. So either keep it on or throw it out. There's another thing that you brought, even if it has a recycling symbol on it, this is polystyrene. Polystyrene, especially in the Berkshires, cannot be recycled. So unfortunately, polystyrene has to go in the trash, even if it has a number on it. And you can tell it's foam. And that's it. There are tops sometimes that come with bottoms that have a symbol, but the top doesn't. If the top doesn't have a symbol on it, you shouldn't recycle it.
Is recycling policies consistent throughout Berkshire County?
No. So, for example, the town of Lee has private haulers picking up, and I think neither hauler brings their waste to the MRF in Springfield. So their policies are somewhat different. I personally take our trash and recyclables to Lennoxdale. There's a facility there. They only take numbers 1 and 2 plastic. So we're really careful when we shop to make sure that if we have to get plastic, we only get 1 or 2, but they take cardboard, they shred paper, they take bottles and cans. So it does vary.
You take it there as an individual.
Right, I take it there as an individual.
And anyone can take it there. You don't have to be a
Anyone can
town
take
resident.
it there, and it's kind of like pay as you throw. If you have trash, they'll charge you based on the size of the bag that you're bringing, but everything else is free.
Anything else you want to be sure people know about recycling?
Well, recycling is not necessarily the answer to all our problems. We really need to reduce the amount of waste that we generate, reduce the amount of even recyclable plastics. People may not have heard, but a lot of our recyclable materials used to go to China, and China's gotten increasingly strict. So every state right now is being affected by a decreased market for recyclables. And it's now costing waste haulers money to get rid of recyclables, whereas in the past they were able to get paid for recyclables. So the big message is, let's reduce the amount of stuff that we have, regardless of whether it's recyclable or not. We got too much stuff. I guess that's the message. Reusable is the way to go.
Tanya, tell us about your booth here today at the Stationery Factory.
I have a booth I sell an all-natural tick and mosquito repellent that I developed last year after my daughter contracted Lyme disease. I've since learned that she's had it since she was about 6 years old. So I sell the spray, but I also educate people about the misconceptions surrounding tick-borne illness.
How did you determine the Lyme disease for your daughter?
Well, she tested negative 2 times in Berkshire County. The testing that they have is very inaccurate. I even suggested to the pediatrician that I think she has a tick-borne disease, and he said, I'll test her, but if she's negative, I don't treat it, and it was negative. So she spent last April break going through contrast CAT scan, ultrasound, x-ray, urinalysis, more blood work, second Lyme test, negative. We took her to a Lyme literate doctor in Del Mar, New York, and they send the test to IGeneX lab in California, and it came back positive.
Is it more difficult to test a child than an adult?
No, it's just all testing for Lyme disease is very inaccurate. The CDC has it set up that there's a 2-tier testing. So the first tier is called the ELISA, and it actually doesn't measure bacteria. It measures your body's immune response, which your body may or may not be in that response.
Wow. So how would someone know that if they were concerned about having a tick disease?
This is partly what I do, because there's so much, often MS, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, Crohn's disease, often is undiagnosed Lyme disease or tick-borne illness. Today, if you get bit by a tick today, you're getting an average of 3 pathogens. So you have co-infections, like we talk about Lyme, but we have, ehrlichiosis, babesiosis, Powassan, Bartonella. There's many co-infections.
I see that you have a tick removal kit here.
Yes.
Tell me about the procedure for removing a tick.
So the procedure is you have to have pointed tweezers, or they sell the what do you call it? It's like a hook, which works really well, but if you get one in the ear, you can't get that motion. So I use the pointed tweezers. You have to go as close as you can to the body, the head of the tick, and you just gently pull up with gloves on. Then you treat it with, an alcohol swab, and I have little bags that tell you where to send it. Because in theory, from what I learned, is you should go on antibiotics right away, send the tick in for testing. If the tick comes back with any pathogens, you stay on the antibiotic for several weeks, not just 1 or 2 weeks. And if it comes back that it doesn't have disease, then you just go off the antibiotics. But personally, I know there's a big controversy with antibiotics. I would rather go on 4 or 5 days of unnecessary antibiotics than to allow these spirochetes to set up housekeeping in my body.
What if someone doesn't actually see the tick but thinks afterwards that maybe this mark on their arm or their leg?
Well, they just have to get to the doctor immediately, but only 50% of the people see a tick or a bullseye. We never saw a tick or a bullseye with my daughter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And just tell us tips for parents or prevention is like the key,
Yeah,
right?
so a big part of what I do, I sell my spray. I tell people buy my spray, don't buy my spray. Do whatever you feel is in your lifestyle to protect yourself from these ticks, mosquitoes, it's life-changing. So this is a handy little thing. It's just a lint roller. Kids can get used to doing this after they play outside. They're jumping in leaves. You go over the whole body with it before they walk back in the house. Clothing that's you've been hiking, you've been outside playing, should go in a dryer, a hot dryer for a half hour before it goes in the washer, because ticks do survive the wash cycle. And they survive the winter. I didn't know that. I always thought that if we had a hard winter, they died. They do not die.
We had a hard winter, and I understand tick is a major problem right now.
It's huge. No, they don't die. They go into the leaf litter, and even in December, January, February, if the temperature is above 32 degrees and there's no snow cover, if they can get out from that leaf litter, they're out looking for a host.
And just tell me about your business, your name, your website, and the products that you offer.
So the name of the product, my business is NOT Enterprises, which is for my daughter, Natalie. I have a daughter, Olivia, and I'm Tanya. The product name is I'm Not Gonna Get Ticked. It's 3 essential oils, a high grade of witch hazel and distilled water. And my website is www.imnotgonnagetticked.com.
Tell us what you're here for today.
Well, I'm here today representing our friends at Mass Energy Consumer Alliance, and they operate the Drive Green program, which is a program for people in the state of Massachusetts who are looking for electric vehicles, and they partner with dealerships across the state that offer deep discounts to the cost of purchasing an electric vehicle. So in addition to state rebates and federal tax credits, the dealers will lop lots of money off the top of the price of the car and make it really affordable for people. So today we're here at the Beat Expo with a bunch of electric vehicles that owners have kindly brought. It's kind of a car rally, so people can actually see these vehicles and how great they are and how practical they are and how they make sense to buy in today's economy and environmental situation. And yeah, that's what we're doing today.
Tell us about how you made a decision to buy an electric car, Joseph.
So there are a lot of incentives. There's still a federal incentive, and then when we bought it, there's a program called More EV, and there's just a lot of programs in Massachusetts that just knock off a lot of the cost of the car, my wife has a very short commute every day, and so we just it's a way to not use any gas on that commute. And
when did you purchase it, your car?
About a year and a half ago.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it's met your expectations?
Yeah, it's great. The mileage, the range on these cars keep getting better and better. This car that we bought has only an 80-mile range, but modern cars have a 150, 230. But for us, just for a short work commute, we never run out, and we just charge it every night. Just plug it in. We just plug it into a regular wall outlet, and it's great.
Do you find if you were to travel with it, you would have access to charging stations?
It depends. Probably not for us because our car has a very short range, but for other cars that can get out a little bit farther, if they can get out on the highway, on the turnpike, they have fast chargers and like that.
And I bought this Chevy Bolt last June, and I've been very pleased with it. The range is 238 miles on a single charge. The only concern with that is that on a 110 outlet at 12 amps, it takes 50 hours to fully charge it from 0 to 280 to 238 miles. But for my usage, I'm using it mostly as a commuter vehicle, so that's more than enough range. I have been to Worcester and back with this car without having to charge it.
Did you say 50 hours to charge it?
50 hours at 110. They do have a fast charger, and there's a 220 option that will charge it in 9.5 hours, so that would be overnight. But it gets about 50 miles on an overnight charge. So for commuting, that's plenty.
And are there public charging stations in Lenox?
Yes, in Lenox there is a what they call a level 2 station, which is a 220 outlet at the police station. which I actually have used on occasion. The Big Y down in Lee also has a charging station.
Which would do it faster than in your own home.
Yes, yeah. They will do a full charge in 9.5 hours. But as I say, for my usage, plugging it into the wall outlet is just fine. Works, gets me where I need to go. And on those occasions, I have been on longer trips. And quite often, at the end of those longer trips, you can also find a charging station, so you can even extend your range that way.
Okay.
Tell us about how you're not spending money on gas and maintenance.
That's basically, there is nothing to say because I'm not spending any money on gas and maintenance. The other wrinkle in this one is we just installed photovoltaic cells, so it's not even costing me electricity anymore because
You're charging it solar.
yes. So with the combination, the cost of operating this is basically nil. But
How long does it take to charge it solar?
well, the solar still just feeds back into the house,
Okay.
so it's still charging at the 110 rate.
Okay.
But I could install a 220 amp circuit out there and charge and get the charger for that, and it would do it in 9.5 hours.
Okay. And how's the ride?
The ride is very surprisingly smooth for such a small car. The other thing that impressed me about this car is how quickly it will accelerate if you need it to. Now I try not to drive where I need to accelerate quickly, but it's nice to know it's there if you need it.
My name's Jane Wynn with Berkshire Environmental Action Team, and I'm joined by former Senator Ben Downing, who's now with NextAmp. Ben was state senator representing all of Berkshire County, parts of Franklin, Hampshire, and Hampden County for 10 years. So he's got sort of the policy level experience on all of this. And then Chris Ruttman is from Western Mass Labor Action, which is a very grassroots, bottom-up networking of individuals to support each other in the whole fight for making the transition to clean energy in a just and equitable way. So I am just going to be moderating and hopefully coming up with questions, and we'll do this for about 25-30 minutes and then take some questions from the audience. So I'm going to start with you, Ben. You were state senator, but now you're with NextAmp. Can you tell us a bit about NextAmp and what you're doing and how that fits in with a just transition?
Yeah, sure, Jane, and thank you all for organizing another great Berkshire Earth Expo fair. So first, NextAmp is a 10-year-old company started by 2 U.S. Army captains, Will Thompson and Dan Leary. Came back from serving in Iraq. Both had electrical engineering experience, wanted to be involved in clean energy, weren't really sure what that was going to look like, and they started a company that did a little bit of everything. They did energy efficiency, geothermal, small community wind projects, started with residential and small commercial and industrial solar projects, and ultimately focused on solar really over the last 5 years with a particular focus on community shared solar. So projects where NextAmp will own the project, lease land, and then provide the credits or the energy as offtake to consumers in the utility service territories. So we do all of the operations and maintenance on those projects and then make sure that residents, not just here in Massachusetts, but when we do projects in Rhode Island, New York, increasingly Maryland, Illinois, California.
Seems to be slowly
Sorry, this one slid on me a little bit
dipping
here.
down.
No, not at all.
You guys may have to adjust them
Yeah,
yourself.
perfect.
All right. Is that better?
Absolutely. That's good. Can everybody hear me? Good. So we will lease land and then enter into basically people can subscribe to the project, not unlike a community-supported agriculture, it's community-shared solar. And we pride ourselves on being able to do that in a way that maximizes residential participation. In states where we think it's feasible, we're also building projects that significantly increase and have a set-aside for low-income population. So Maryland has a program in which we are doing that, and we hope to learn some lessons to be able to bring that to other areas as well. And part of my job at Nexamp is figuring out what those other markets are that we're going to go into, and also trying to figure out how we can add in new technologies like battery storage to help improve those projects and do different types of projects to help manufacturers, help residential consumers. So a little bit of everything.
Cool, cool. So, Chris, let me turn to you. And first, I want to know a little bit about what Western Mass Labor Action is and how you interact with people who are having issues with energy.
Okay. So Western Mass Labor Action is it's a grassroots organizing drive of low-income seasonal and service workers. We're 100% volunteer, so we don't have any paid staff. We're independent of government money. And we've been around 44 years in this county, taking on the different issues that are affecting our constituencies. So be that rate hikes by utility companies, or doing disaster relief work in the hill towns after the ice storm, fighting for the reinstantiation of the hospital in North Adams when that was shut down, helping out the Nurses Association with their fight right now for safe staffing. So anyway, we're able to take on a whole host of different issues, and it's membership driven. So as a membership organization, it's really the members of Western Mass Labor Action, i.e. low-income working families, who decide on the kind of campaigns we take on. So it's very much emanating from the rank and file and from the grassroots. And then in order to kind of facilitate being able to build an organization that can pursue these kind of things, we have a benefits program to stabilize our people, because we don't want to kind of run around and say things need to change, but at the same time have our constituency, and not having access to enough food, or not having access to adequate dental care, or getting shut off on their gas or electricity. So these are all benefits of membership. We do utility advocacy. We have a food pantry that stays open 7 days a week, 9 in the morning till 9 at night. Guido's Fresh Marketplace helps us out. They donate 50 pounds of fruits and vegetables. As I'm sure we all know, it's very difficult for low-income working families to have access to nutritious food. So that's a little bit about who we are. And I guess the way this kind of dovetails, we're really excited to be here today. So I don't know is there anybody here who have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals? Yeah? Yeah. Great. Anybody else? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, not a lot of us have heard about this, but all 193 member nations of the United Nations adopted the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which were 17 goals to make change, make global change. And so number 7 is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. And so. Anyway, so the reason I'm here today is because I want to talk about environmental justice as it applies to access to energy for the lowest, for the folks who are at the bottom of the totem pole.
Neat.
Yeah.
I think one of the things you had said that really made an impression on me was working with people who are having to choose between eating and heating. And I think more and more it's going to be also between eating and cooling in the summer. I know that in the summers you have air-conditioned space that you invite the neighborhood in if they need to be getting cool.
We do.
You also mentioned about how many people you help with the utilities acting illegally. Can you just speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Just to address the summer thing, there's no summer moratorium on utility shutoffs, which means it could be 100 degrees out and a family could not be able to afford electricity, and the companies have no obligation to turn your service on. There are protections, if everybody in the household is over 65 years of age, you're protected. But if you have like 10 to 65-year-olds and one 18-year-old, there's no protection for you. So, and then the costs. Actually, give me a second.
So one of the things I'm particularly interested in is where the utilities have acted illegally in shutoffs.
Yeah, so I've been doing this for 12 years, and there's just been instance after instance of the utility companies breaking the law to bilk, and extract as much resources from our membership as they possibly can. So this has included charging a non-refundable security deposit on people's accounts. It's not even legal for a company on residential accounts, it's not even legal to charge a refundable security deposit on your account. We've had the company tell customers that they're no longer customers of record and are ineligible to submit medical protection forms after a period of like two to 3 weeks, when your eligibility actually extends is a 90-day period. We've called the companies to work out payment plans, and they've insisted that they can't accept any less than 100% of what is owed on people's bills, which is a total lie. The Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, which is the agency that's supposed to represent the ratepayers, has done. We've communicated to them these situations, and they've gotten the companies to accept 25% down on people's bills. Okay, it's a huge difference, right? If you owe $500 and your income is $1,000 versus being able to pay $125 down. So just over the 12 years I've been organizing, it's just been case after case after case, and it goes all the way back to the 1980s when I was not here. But this organization dealt with over 2,000 utility cases of illegal shutoffs.
Great.
Okay.
If I can then use that to switch over to Ben.
Yep.
When you were, I think we were at Ioka Farms, and you were doing a town hall meeting, and I'm very concerned about the Mass Save program and helping everyone save energy. And you said that maybe it shouldn't be the public utilities, I'm not quite sure why they're still called public utilities, being in charge of this program. And that thought had actually never occurred to me. How could we actually, what would it take to have it not be under the public utilities?
And there's a bunch of different ways you could structure it. I think the first thing to point out is this: when the utility companies would come to the State House to advocate, or when you'd see their information that they would put out there, more often than not, they were targeting renewable energy and saying it's too expensive. There's a better way to do it. Rarely did they point out that if you look at your bill, we spend more, and I think rightfully so, on energy efficiency than we do on renewable energy. The utilities never criticize that, because the utilities make a profit off of energy efficiency. They operate and maintain those programs, or contract out for those programs. It's a monopoly program. And Massachusetts deserves credit for being first in the nation in energy efficiency, but being better than 49 other states that aren't doing nearly enough isn't anything to brag about. So good, we're hitting our goals, but there's a lot more we can and should do. And I think it's far past time to question whether or not having the utilities run our energy efficiency programs is the best way to achieve that goal. There's a variety of different ways you could structure it. You could have an energy efficiency utility that's a quasi-public independent utility that's only focused on energy efficiency, so you don't have some of the almost inherent conflict in having the utilities run those programs. You could set up a marketplace in which customers go through their home energy audit, their apartment audit, and then have a series of incentives attached to them that they could then go out into the marketplace with, not unlike how some private marketplaces are set up for solar. If you get a quote off of a sort of a generic run through of your home, or how some of the healthcare marketplaces have been set up. There's a variety of different ways to get at it. I don't pretend to know what the ideal one is, but I don't think the structure we're in right now is the ideal structure. It made a lot of sense to get our energy efficiency programs up and started because there's universal access through the utility companies. But we've learned a lot, and the clean energy economy in Massachusetts has grown significantly. And if we wanted to take the next step, we shouldn't be bound by what the utilities think is the right way to run a program.
Nice. For those of us who tend to be out there advocating, is this something that do we need to have it figured out of how we would suggest to do it, or do we go to our current legislators and say, this is what we want, you figure out how to structure it?
Yeah, it never hurts to have a solution, but I think the most important thing is just making it more of a topic of discussion. Too often now, when you talk about changing the efficiency programs at all, and it's a small part of the conversation, but when it comes up, the default is just, well, we're first in the nation, why would we change anything? And I mean, that's lazy, and we should be demanding better than where we are right now. There's a lot more work that can and should be done.
What would you pick out as some of the things that would most help getting solar, energy efficiency, storage, all the clean tech that we would like, moving faster? Are there particular bills out there right now that you would say we should be working on?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, right? Like, I don't handle government affairs for our company. I made a pledge. I was not going to, jump from one side of the desk to the other, and that's incredibly important to me. But I also think it's incredibly important for all of us who care about these issues to remain engaged. And I think, the Senate, my former place of employment, has put forward a significant next step in climate and clean energy legislation in Massachusetts, some of which was included in previous bills that we were unable to successfully pass, whether that's increasing the RPS, putting a price on carbon, any number of other steps that can and should be taken. But it isn't just about legislative work, right? It's about making sure that the Department of Public Utilities knows that they aren't there simply to regulate and work with one industry, but they're there to hopefully make decisions with the broader public good in mind. And at the very least, they ought to know that while they're making those decisions, everyone in this room and in thousands of rooms like it across Massachusetts are watching those decisions and will make their voices heard both during those decisions and after at the ballot box. We need to continue to advocate to our legislators, and we're lucky we've got a great delegation out here. Smitty Pignatelli on the Environment Committee, they just moved out a strong environmental justice bill. I know there's more work to be done there, but I know it's a priority for him to try and get that done this session. Certainly, Adam Hines, Tricia, Paul, Representative Barrett, the whole group, I know they care deeply about these issues, all from a different perspective, and we need to make sure they know this is a priority for all of their constituents, so that they can be advocating as forcefully as possible to their colleagues who, might not be lucky enough to have as great constituents or as forward-thinking constituents.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you brought up the Department of Public Utilities. And I know there's a bill out there right now that we've been working on, trying to make it so that they actually have to, if somebody appeals, for instance, a state representative and a bunch of their constituents, they would actually have to have a seat at the table, which right now they're being denied. But Chris, I know that you have had some interesting run-ins with the Department of Public Utilities as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Oh, boy. Well, let me first say that, the Western Mass Labor Action, our philosophy is an organized community building an organized community that holds its government accountable, and especially through the form that we do it, which is, where no one gets paid, and we don't accept government funds, that's. Well, let me tell people about the Department of Public Utilities. Okay, we went down there in 2007. Berkshire Gas was trying to raise their rates by 29%. They had done a 1 month 78% rate hike because they were anticipating higher costs as a result of Katrina. So they had put that through without any kind of review process. And then Berkshire Gas was asking for 29%. So we went down to the headquarters of the Department of Public Utilities in Boston, and we asked for an audience, and we ended up getting an audience with Tim Shevlin, who at the time was the executive director. And we presented him with all the petitions we had collected, and we actually read from the petition part of the codes of the Department of Public Utilities. And the code that we read and recited to him was the one that says, if the department decides it is in the interest of the public, okay, the department retains the power and the right to regulate the supply of gas. And we read that to him. And I can quote you his response. His response to us was, okay, and his response to us was, I do not acknowledge that. This was his own regulations. Okay, so we said, okay, what about this 78% rate hike? Okay, which we knew existed because it said it on people's bills. What did he say, his response? I don't concede that. Okay, I mean, so anyway, so as you can see why our organization, has manifested what I would call a sort of a healthy mistrust of government. The DPU has come through for us when we've taken our advocacy to them. As I was stating before, we have been able to get 25% down on somebody's a down payment on somebody's bill, but. That's just a flavor of what we're dealing with, and the other thing I want to say about the government is they put in this deregulation law in the late 90s, and politicians made promises. They said, we're doing this so that rates go down, and so they deregulated supply. They put a cap on it for 2 years, which was supposedly to allow competition to develop. They took the cap off, and then you have these huge companies come in, and there's absolutely no, rates went up, right? It was a failed policy, okay? And what has been the government's response to that? Nothing. No one has said anything about this. If you're saying that you're putting in a policy to reduce people's energy costs and create competition and promote a free market, okay? And this doesn't, and the whole thing doesn't pan out. Well, propose a counter policy, and it's been manifest that the state has not been interested in remediating a policy that was extremely deleterious.
And I think you had a large contingent at the recent EverSource rate hike.
Yeah, we did. We were, yeah. EverSource shut off 10,903 households in Western Mass in 1 year. Okay, that's approximately 1 out of every 7 households is getting shut off in Western Mass. They only have 200,000 customers. They did almost 11,000 shut-offs. So if you do the math, that's about 1 out of every 7 households. So anyway. So we spent a lot. Sorry.
You were able.
Yes. So we testified.
Large contingent of people were able to actually reduce the rate hike.
We did, and fortunately, there was a lot of people jumping in as well. I definitely give credit to the legislative delegation of the Berkshires because all 4 went up and spoke out against the rate hike. The mayor of Pittsfield, so we were. What I found out was that here in Western Mass, our transcript from the public hearings were longer than the transcript in Boston. So kudos to everybody. Kudos to everybody in Western Mass. But yeah, and as we've been able to do in the past, we were instrumental in petitioning, postcarding, testifying to get this rate hike reduced by $10 million. So in 2009, we got National Grid's rate hike reduced by about $60 million. So,
And I
Yep.
think your questions.
Related question, what would be the opportunity or challenge of putting a counter? I know we tried to put through a gas tax to supplement their transportation growth. What would be the opportunity for a countywide tax? And how could you go about doing that?
You'd have to establish the district. You need legislation to do it. There's legislation that allows for regional ballot initiatives right now, and that would create several different potential funding streams. Could be a local payroll tax, could be a local sales, could be a local gas. Obviously, there are parts of the country that have local income taxes, right? Like, we fooled ourselves into thinking it's either one big statewide way or nothing. We need a significant statewide investment for projects that span from one region to the next, but we also need to have regional specific ways to do that. So the legislation's sitting there. We got it through the Senate once when I was there. Once.
Partway there.
Yeah.
Ben, you had a question?
Yes, getting back to the DPU, how much would could the anti-consumer attitude of the DPU change if there was a different governor? Is that a factor, or is it much broader based than that?
Our struggles with the DPU have persisted across Democratic and Republican lines. I think, right. I guess it's a little bit more pronounced with the Republican administration. When you have someone like Angela O'Connor, who's the chairwoman of the DPU, who was an industry lobbyist for 6 years before becoming the commissioner, or I think his name is Robert Hayden, who ran a congressional campaign campaigning against government regulations, and then got a position on the DPU as well. So. Certainly, it is the fox guarding the henhouse right now. But it may be a little bit better under the Democrats, but it's still been a struggle for us. So.
And to Chris's point, like, too often this happens for the DPU. It also happens for elected officials, and the second I want to speak to, but there is this assumption, that there isn't bias in how utilities operate, right? And I don't fault them for having that bias, right? Like, they're at that company, they're thinking about too often just what's in the best interest of that company, and not as often as we'd like them to think what's in the best interest of the broader communities. But too often policymakers, whether it's at the DPU or elected officials, when you get a call from a constituent concerned about energy issues, one of your first calls is to the utility company, right? And they're members of the local chamber of commerce, they're engaged in the community, you see some good things they're doing, and you call there looking for an answer, right? The problem isn't that call. The problem is if that's the only call, right? And I think we need to push the DPU to not just think about things through the lens of how will this impact the utilities, but how will this impact the broader community that you've got to serve. And we've got to remind elected officials constantly, and I had to remind myself of this and be pushed to remind myself of this by people like Chris and Jane and others and many in this room, right? That there's got to be a better way than where we are right now, right?
I'm sorry, I forgot my thought. Jane, go ahead.
Okay, we'll
It's okay.
go for another question, and when you remember it, we'll come back.
Yeah.
Nice to have it not be me in
One
that
over there,
position.
Jane?
Oh, okay. I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then another thing is that, the DPU is there to protect the ratepayers. Their mission statement is to make sure that ratepayers pay as little as possible. And yet, talk to 90% of, or 95% of our members, and nobody knows they exist. The only way they would know that DPU exists is there's a little line on the bottom of your electric bill that says, if you think you've been incorrectly billed, you can call the Department of Public Utilities. But for people who need to set up payment plans, people need to get service reinstated. It's a government agency that nobody knows about. Number one, and then number two is they have like 5 investigators for the entire state, and one of whom is absolutely impossible to deal with. So anyway. So.
You can question. Oh, we had a question over
You
there.
go ahead and take
Oh, yeah.
that one, Kai. I can't see them.
Yeah, sure.
At the beginning of our discussion of this, you mentioned the UN sustainability goals, and nobody in the room knew what those were, right? So my question to you is sort of a twofold bifurcated thing.
Okay.
First of all, why do you think it's important that we know these goals? Secondly, how can we leverage the fact that these goals exist within this community to bring change about in this way? And third, can you talk a little bit about the interdependence of the goals? Because they're not, one of the problems we have with UN Sustainable Development Goals is that they end up in silos. And then they don't, one doesn't help the other, whereas they really are all meshed and interdependent. They're woven together for a reason. So I was wondering if you could give forth a little about that.
Okay.
Great question.
Okay.
How do we use them? What are they exactly?
Yeah.
Is there any way to get funding quoting them? Can you make representatives feel guilty about the fact that they're not reading them? And how do we break them out of their silos and get one to support the other? And why do you think they're important?
So I'll talk about the SDGs. Yeah. So the SDGs are probably, if you look at any sort of if you look at any sort of policy, the SDGs, I would say, are like the most important thing right now in the globe as far as what needs to happen in this world. You had 193 nations consent on 17 different goals that they want to have happen by 2030, and there's been a stony silence in the United States, okay, about implementing these goals, whether it's reversing hunger, reversing poverty, providing sustainable, affordable energy, access to water, healthy environments, adequate education, housing. Thank you. So, a stony silence. You don't hear a politician talk about it. You don't hear the regular news talk about it. And you don't even hear the digital media talk about it. Whereas there's other countries in the world who have taken this very, very seriously. Very, very seriously.
How do we get the word out?
So
at least within our community.
Right. So how do we do it in the community? There's so the greatest threat to the status quo are not individuals adopting individual solutions, but organizations that are breaking down divisions and amassing collective strength. And that's not to obviate individual responsibility, but without organization, you can't challenge, you can't take on these fights, okay? So our solution, rooted in the history of labor in the United States, and all the gains that labor has ever made in this country, whether it's livable wages, the 8-hour workday, or what have you, our solution is organization, and it's building an organization that can really take on fights and amass strength in numbers, in the same way that that laborers throughout the United States were able to do for many, many years. Although once you got into the 30s and the 40s, you had extremely heinous legislation passed that disempowered the union movement, and has carried that to today, where the percentage of the unionized workforce is about 6 or 7% in the private sector. And you can look at income, like I saw something which charted income over the last 30 years, and then charted the decrease in unionization, and it was a parallel. There were parallel lines, right? If working people don't have organization, they lose out. And so that's where we got to start. Is we got to start with building something that is a means of association for people who want to take on these kind of challenges. As far as the goals, kind of interlocking, I haven't thought about that very much. But you know, so that's So I can't really answer that. But anyway, that's.
I think one of the things with that is exactly going back to your organizing, and I hope we're seeing it now much more. Environmental groups, all the diversity groups, labor, starting to work more and more together. And I think having this meeting today, bringing all sorts of different people together to try and work together to build a real network to both bring forward the goals, but to make a better world.
You have to get the people where they are, right? And I think one of the upsides of the UN goals is that it gives a variety of different entry points to talk to people about these issues. If you are working, 2 jobs, 90 hours a week, you've got a couple of kids, you're trying to figure out how to pay the bills, then maybe conservation just isn't something you have the time to think about, even if you care deeply about it, right? Like that isn't a value judgment to say just because you are working poor that you don't care. You probably do, but you've got only so much bandwidth and only so many hours in every day. We can't say, well, you ought to be able to care about it for that reason. If we care about these issues around climate and the environment, around justice, then we need to find ways to get to people where they are and connect the solutions that we propose to improving the quality of their lives every single day. And I absolutely firmly believe that we can, and we can't be stubborn about it, and we've got to think about it, right? We need more diversity in every organization. We need broader sets of opinion. We need to be far better at all of this, right? So we can. We just got to dig into it.
Nice.
Can I just jump in on one thing? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just jumping in on the challenges to encouraging low-income working families to get on board with conservation. One of the policies that was introduced in 2008 under the Green Communities Act was this decoupling policy, so decoupling refers to the separation of sales and revenues, and what it did was it gave companies, energy companies, the ability to set benchmark profits, and then they would agree to encourage conservation. And if people used less energy, then the company would be able to raise your rates commensurately to achieve its benchmark profit. And it's a really slippery piece of legislation, and it's not really talked about very much. But in light of having a program like Mass Save, which is going to make you more energy efficient, based on decoupling, it does not matter. It does not matter if you save energy. For the environment, it does, but for a low-income working family, if you are using less power, okay, your rates will commensurately be increased under the decoupling policy. And I just wanted to read what that says. And it's really, really slippery. It says, the order's goal is to remove the disincentives that distribution companies face in fostering energy efficiency and demand reduction programs. Currently, distribution companies' revenues are tied to sales. Okay, yeah. The more electricity or gas customers use, the more revenues the companies earn. The department's new decoupling mechanism will separate, hence decouple, electric and gas distribution company revenues from changes in consumption, i.e. commodity sales. Regardless of the underlying cause of the changes, decoupling will align distribution companies' financial interests with state policy objectives by promoting the deployment of demand-reducing resources according to the department. At the same time, it will ensure that companies are not harmed by decreases in sales associated with those deployments. Give me an effing break. Okay? Seriously, give me an effing break.
Could we just get to one more question,
let's
maybe?
do one more quick question, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
Yeah, just what you were talking about, it is inspiring to see the labor environment and business.
Other. Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Together, and my question is, what do you feel like looking into the next year, the next 2, 5, 10 years? What's the growing edge in terms of collective and work together and creating impact as a community of government, nonprofits, grassroots organizing, all coming all together, and what's possible in your mind?
Okay. So it's the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's Campaign. Martin Luther King was bringing together, Cesar Chavez and Reyes Tijerina, and Bobby Kennedy was getting in there, and so I think there's a lot to be done. And certainly the legacy that Dr. King left us was that he was really starting to speak about economic issues, and in the last year of his life, and was arguably was shot because of that. But I think that there's awesome power to be marshaled, absolutely, in people getting together. From the labor perspective, what we see is that a lot of your power comes from your ability to withdraw your labor from the economy, right? So that's our perspective. But absolutely, the more collaboration is feasible, the more we should do it.
Yeah, and I know from my previous life, right, that when it was one thing when environmental groups would be advocating on clean energy policy, but when organized labor was able to come up and add their voice, or when the business community was able to come up and add their voice, and quite frankly, especially at the State House, when you saw different business groups get engaged and say, hey, there might be this other larger business group that claims to speak for the entire business community, but we're another part of the business community. We care deeply about climate, and the business community is not a monolith by any means. I would hope that some of the upside of of having the administration that we have at the federal level is that it makes common allies of a lot of people who might not have otherwise worked together in the past. And as we all look for outlets for the energy that there is right now, that we don't just say we're going to dig our heads down and focus on the 10 goals our organization has, but we try and think about, all right, what can we do differently? Who can we work with better? Who can we learn from, and how can we all grow together? So I think there's plenty of opportunity there. Whether that's on climate, on poverty, any number of different issues.
Great, and I think on that we're going to have to wrap it up, but thank you all for coming. Thank you, Chris.